Okay, boys and girls, today we're talking about modal auxiliary verbs. And you're probably like, what are these verbs? What is she talking about? And these verbs, these modal verbs, are a special kind of helping verb where they kind of modify or change the verb meaning somewhat. So they express a possibility, an obligation, a necessity, or an ability. And there's several words that are considered these modal verbs. You probably never thought of these words as a type of verb. So we have can, could, may, might, will, would, shall, should, and we have must. And the words we're talking about, these verbs we're talking about today, are verbs that are going to be showing obligation. And maybe you don't know what obligation is. And obligation is something that, it's an action that requires you to do something. So it's your obligation to go and do your schoolwork, or to come to school, or to do your work. It's my obligation, or I'm responsible to teach you. So that's my obligation. And these are the specific verbs that indicate obligation. Should. So for example, you should help your mother clean the kitchen. We have shall, and it says here in parentheses that it's used mostly for laws and documents in the U.S. And that's true. You'll see shall maybe in like legal documents, those types of things. Not something that we use on an everyday basis. But it says the collection of taxes shall pay for the building of schools. And we have must, and it's used to give an order that someone is obliged to follow. You must do your homework before watching TV. So let's look at some of these words that indicate our obligation. So which one is the modal verb in this sentence? It says you should have been watching the baby. And if you picked should, you're correct. Now, looking at the next one, which one's the action verb? What are you doing in this? It says you should have been watching the baby. What are you doing? Well, you're watching, right? And then we have some helping verbs in here. So you're going to be looking for the helping verbs. And your helping verbs here are have been. And all of these verbs work together to create your sentence. Again, the word should indicates that obligation or responsibility to watch the baby. I'm going to try something else. So again, which is the modal verb in this sentence? She must take her medicine before school. If you said must, you're correct. Now let's think about that action verb. What are you actually doing? So we're looking for that action verb. And if you said take, you're also correct. And again here, this word must shows that you are responsible. It's your obligation to take the medicine. So now we're going to look at some, and I'm not going to have you copy them down or anything. We're just going to kind of read them and talk about them together to see if you can find these obligation verbs. These modal auxiliary verbs, but that are talking about obligation. And it says circle the modal auxiliary verb that shows obligation, okay? And it says to put a square on the action verb. We're just going to talk about them for the sake of time and explanation. So number one says, you must sing loudly. So if we're doing this one kind of together, you must sing loudly. what is the verb that what's showing obligation, something that you're responsible for doing? And for this one, it would be must. And what are you doing? What's the action verb in this sentence? And the action verb in this sentence is sin. Okay? Looking at the second one, it says the board of directors shall be responsible for the payment. So, which one is this obligation? What's showing obligation? And again, this one was kind of easy because it's shall, and we know shall is that kind of one that you're not really using all that often in your everyday language. Now, what are they doing though? What's the action that they're doing? And if you said responsible, you are correct. And let's do 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so number 3, you must use a pencil. What's that obligation? That word that shows obligation is must. And what are you doing? What's your action verb? Is use. Okay? Number 4, you should have been quiet in the lunchroom. What's that obligation? That modal auxiliary obligation verb. And you should pick should. And what is your action verb? It is quiet. And then we do have some helping verbs in here, and it would have been. And the last one is, shall I call a doctor for you? What's that obligation? That obligation should be shall. And what's the person doing? What's that action verb? And you should pick call. Okay, so there's a little practice for you. You'll have a practice worksheet to see how you do on it. And